This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under-18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 564 for November 4th, 2018. Coming up on today's show, a poly-friendly parentage law in the U.S. That's coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Minx, back behind the mic after just producing one episode last month. I think I need to start calling this Polyamory Monthly, or maybe Polyamory Bi-Weekly. That sounds a little bit better. At any rate, working to get things on a more even keel. But in the meantime, there's so much good stuff I'm so excited to bring you this week/month's episode. We do have some good news, at least in the U.S., on the legal front, but there's lots of other stuff to talk about first, starting with, I have had at least a dozen people email me, Skype me, text me about this new Netflix show, Wanderlust, to the point that I actually posted on Facebook saying, we're watching it, stop asking me. Now, I made it through the first four episodes. Lustyguy and Elle did watch the first episode with me. And for those who aren't aware, the premise of this show is a loving couple in the UK that have lost their sexual spark. So they decide, well, if everything else is working great, let's see other people for the sex because everything else is perfect. Now, one thing I really like about this show, well, there's a lot that I like about the show. First of all, the craft, as Lustyguy would call it, is incredibly high. The scenes are beautifully shot. The acting is phenomenal. Toni Collette is like a personal goddess. She's just amazing. In fact, I pity the people who have to be in a scene with her because she gives so much with a breath, with an expression. There's an entire story told in a 2-second pause. She is just fucking amazing. And by the way, has some near nude scenes and just bras and panties. And, you know, she's like my age and she is keeping it tight. Now, the other things I like about the show, apart from that, are that it actually shows both the joy of poly and of opening up your relationship and some of the messiness inherent in making this type of decision with your relationship structure. And it doesn't just focus on the problems like we do. I mean, basically, I feel like on the podcast, we really focus on the problems a lot. It's one of the reasons why I started the Happy Poly Moment segment. So we weren't just focusing on the problems and also the poly in the news. So we could hear what was going on, both positive and interesting and negative in the rest of the world. But I do like that they do address some of the problems that one can come across when opening up one's relationship, but they don't really dwell on them. And they do actually make a point of showing the good stuff too. And I really like that. And I got to tell you, if you do not like watching people in really awkward social situations, you're not going to like this show. Because first of all, they're British. And then there's just a lot of awkwardness in polyamory. How do you ask someone out when everybody believes you're happily married? You know, is it okay that they think that you're cheating? When do you tell them, no, it's all okay? The awkwardness is so painful and so well done. You just you're like, and there's so much of it, and they just handle it really well. I find that part fairly realistic. Now, I'm going to give a couple of spoilers for at least the 4 episodes, and as far as I've watched. So if you haven't watched it yet and you don't want to hear the spoilers, you might want to fast forward a couple of minutes up until you hear the Poly in the News segment music. There's this weird combination of realism in terms of how people come to polyamory and a lack of realism in how quickly things work out for them, I find. So, interestingly, they came to this decision to see other people when they had both almost simultaneously cheated on the other person. And then husband comes forward and said, I did this. And the wife doesn't get mad because she's like, well, actually, okay, so I did this. Maybe we should talk about what's going on between us. I love the way that conversation was handled because it was very quickly steered away from blame or yours was worse than mine because it was a coworker, or yours was worse than mine because it was this type of sex. There was a little bit of that, but Joy, the wife, quickly steered it away to like, look, let's look at this as a symptom of a larger problem. Is the other stuff working out well? Now, you and I know that that's probably massively unrealistic, that this conversation would go so quickly and so directly and the blame would just vanish. However, she is a therapist, so there's a certain amount of credibility to that particular thing. But I really like that instead of dwelling on all of those emotions they were having, they let you see a glimpse of them and then they moved it forward. And that is how the show tends to deal with a lot of these issues, I think. When they do go and see other people and come back together, the sex that was non-existent before is instantly absolutely magnificent. Unrealistic? Yes. But I feel like they're telling a condensed version of a story that a lot of us have. For us, it may take 3 months, 6 months, a year, or even more before we really find the right partner, before the sex with our partner becomes absolutely phenomenal or gets the specific benefits. Maybe not. I'll quibble about the realism of that, but I like the general thrust, of the story. Now, they set out this restriction in the beginning, as many people do. This is just sex. It's not love. They say that right up front. And it's like, oh, okay, how's this going to play out? Well, it doesn't take long before I've only watched 4 episodes and it's already been an issue that, you know what? The husband loves the woman he's seeing. He really likes her. He cares about her. And he's like, well, I got to break up with you because I love you. And that's always weird and awkward and unfair to everybody involved. And so they talk about it and we're like, hey, all right, well, let's try this with love then, if that's what's happening. And there's this wonderful couple of scenes where the 4 of them go out together on a wonderful foursome date, and it just is fun. It's one of those fun sequences where you're like, oh yeah, grown-ups can actually do this. Yes, it's awkward at first, but then it can be fun. So it's kind of like, you get for half an episode, you get a happy poly moment, which is kind of nice. We don't always see that. I love that they show you the fun they're having instead of just talking about the fun that they're having. There is this beautiful moment that I really loved where there was an older neighbor talking to Joy, the wife, who was also a therapist, comes over and just sort of personally shares that she and her husband had tried watching porn and it wasn't really her thing. But she stutters and stumbles around until she says, but there was this woman in it and I couldn't take my eyes off her. And you see this woman who is maybe 60, 70, if she's a day, confide in her neighbor that she might be a little bit lesbian, a little bit bisexual, a little bit something other than just heterosexual. And with a 60, 70-year-old woman, this we don't usually see in American TV. I loved that moment. I love the beautiful moment of confidence between women. And I love that they chose to explore that with somebody who wasn't a 20-year-old, perfect hair, makeup, everything. And there's also some interesting scenes about the question of when do we come out to our kids and how do we come out to our kids? How does that go? And it was almost a non-issue, I think. And I love it because I thought that was, there may be more coming later, but I find that for most people, it does kind of end up being a non-issue around your kids. And of course, write me if I'm wrong. At any rate, I think it's a really good quality product. I think there's a lot of things that will be beneficial to people who are thinking about trying non-monogamy of some sort for the first time that are in there. And it's good stuff. And I won't say this much about this week's Poly in the News article but simply that Teen Vogue hit it out of the park again. They did a great article addressing some of the common misconceptions about polyamory. I love that they interviewed and prominently featured solo poly people in it as well, and that they really stressed the need for communication. I mean, Teen Vogue is really just hitting it out of the park when it comes to non-monogamy and poly these days. And next up, we have a special guest, Melissa Hall, to talk about an update to polyparentage laws happening in Washington state here in the U.S. that may have significance throughout the rest of the U.S. And I'm very excited to welcome Melissa Hall to Polyweekly. Welcome.
Hello, Minx.
And you actually have a little bit of a Polyweekly history because back when we had forums before the days of Facebook, you moderated our forums.
Yes, I moderated your forums. I used the name Frimge, and it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's funny. I only saw it written. We'd never met in person. We still haven't. We're doing this online because I have a cold. And I always thought it was Vrimj, which is silly because there's just a J at the end. It's not like Jay.
Yeah, no one knows how to pronounce it until they hear me say it, so you're not alone.
Why don't you give us, our listeners, just a little bit of your background, who you are, and why you're here.
I have been poly all of my dang life because I stumbled across polyamory on the internet as a teenager, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Let's just do it that way. I have had, a wide variety of arrangements like a lot of people have. And now I am 42 and have more than 2 decades of being poly in various formats, but I've also along the way picked up a law degree, and I'm a practicing attorney in Seattle.
That's fantastic. And we will need to meet in person at some point when I do not have a cold.
Yes.
Now, before you guys get too excited and start thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known, I was going to tweet in my burning legal question. We have plenty of episodes where we have answered your poly legal questions. Of course, that not being legal advice, and you should always consult with a lawyer who is practicing in your state or country. But you mentioned that there is something going on legally in Washington state here in the U.S. that could be very interesting. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. I'm very excited because starting in January, Washington state has a new Parentage Act that applies. Parentage determines who has parental rights to a child. It's of interest to me because I have an 18-month-old, but it's of interest to a lot of poly people too, because if you're in a poly family and you have a child, the fact that generally only 2 people, if that, have parental rights to that child is often a legal issue. The new Parentage Act in Washington state follows along with the old one in that it makes possible third parent adoptions, and it has rules for de facto parentage, which has been a creature developed by courts for some tricky situations, but hasn't really ever been codified before.
What does this mean for poly folks in Washington state and elsewhere in the U.S.?
Well, it means that if you are part of a poly family, you now have some options. First of all, you can do a third parent adoption and have the original 2 parents join in the adoption petition, which maintains their parental rights instead of severing them, and add a third parent. It does take a home study. It does take the involvement of a social worker. It's not a quick or easy process, but there is a process there where more than 2 people can have parental rights. There's no inherent bias that says that just 2 people can. And at least what I've heard is that the Department of Health has 4 parents as a possibility in their database right now.
So you said, you've mentioned third parent, and you just said 4. How many parents are we talking about? I mean, some people's polycules can be pretty big. It's not that everybody would want to adopt every child, but is there a limit on the number of parents a child can have?
There is no limit in statute. You would have to convince a judge that it's in the best interest of the child to have more parents, but generally it is in the best interest of a child to have more parents. and you would have to have a social worker do a study saying that it was in the best interest of the child. So I can't tell you how many parents the child can have.
There's no restriction based on that law.
No, the law just creates a method by which parents can decide that another parent should be added to their number.
That's pretty cool. I think that's a nice little victory.
Yeah, it was designed really for step-parent adoptions, and it's been used a couple of times in cases involving artificial reproductive technology, but it has a knock-on benefit for polyamorous people. But if you don't mind, I'm going to do a little digression here, because this is a big deal potentially.
Let's digress.
Yeah. The other exciting thing is that it's a uniform law, and that means that it's enacted by a commission specifically to create laws that they're going to push for adoption in all 50 states. That means that even if you're not in Washington or California or Delaware, who have also passed this, even if it's not enacted yet, you have the ability to push for the enaction of this law and potentially more rights for poly parents.
So this law is written so that every state can adopt it. But different states don't have to adopt it.
Different states don't have to.
If they do they have to adopt it as is? Can some evil people get in there and pare down the law so that it's useless?
It absolutely can be altered and modified in adoption. The thing is, adoption of the law, not adoption of children, but both are in play here. The thing is that generally uniform laws, they try to enact as uniformly as possible, because that's one of the benefits. It means that when you go from state to state, things don't vary too much. And particularly in the realm of parentage, there's a big advantage to having a relatively uniform set of laws. This particular Uniform Act wasn't designed necessarily to benefit poly families. It was designed to remove gendered language and to help LGBT individuals in some of the issues they've had around parentage. But it happens to, just like rising waters tend to lift all boats, it happens to have effects for polyamorous people.
Really cool.
Yeah. And that's the exciting news, is that frequently when you talk about polyamorous activism, it's really hard because there aren't a lot of obvious places to push. When we're successful, it's often when we're backing somebody else. And this is a great play we can back on the LGBT community to help get their parentage rights secured. And as a knock-on, we have the option, perhaps, of getting our parentage rights secured.
Is there a place where people in a state where this hasn't been adopted yet can go to find out what they can do to forward this?
Absolutely. Because it's the Uniform Act, there's a lot of information as part of the Uniform Law Commission, and it has the acts, the legislative fact sheet, and why states should adopt. There's an entire enactment kit you can just download. Also, there's likely to be a LGBT group in your state that is involved perhaps in trying to get this enacted.
And the URL is governmental and rather unwieldy, but we will put a link in the show notes at polyweekly.com or on your app wherever you listen to your podcasts.
And the potential for third parent adoption is wonderful and an excellent thing about this act, but there's another part of it that has the potential to affect a lot of poly families as well that you probably need to know about, and that is de facto parentage.
What is de facto parentage? I have no idea what that means.
Okay. It's a situation that happens fairly frequently in the case of divorce, where somebody raises a child as their own, and both the child and the person who is involved in the child's life see themselves as a parent. However, the law does not. This has led to some really heartbreaking situations over the years, and some courts have started to recognize this relationship under the name de facto parentage, but it was very much a sort of fragile, judge-dependent kind of determination. So this new act defines de facto parentage and creates a structure for claiming it.
How, is there a strict definition?
There was not before. Now there is, because it's part of the new Uniform Act. Just one second. It talks about being part of a child's life and the child seeing you as a parent, holding out the child as your own child. So it's Article 6 under the Uniform Act, talks about the ways that you can be adjudicated a parent. Okay, here it is, Section 609, adjudicating the claim of de facto parentage of a child. It has to happen before the child is 18, while the child is alive, and you have to have specific facts that support the claim. That means, you have to show that the child, that you engaged in caretaking of the child, that you were a regular member of the child's household for a significant period, that you undertook full and permanent responsibilities of a parent of a child without the expectation of being paid, that you said that the kid was your kid, that you established a bonded relationship with the child, and that another parent fostered or supported the bonded independent relationship. Looking at all of that, the court has to determine whether or not that's in the best interest of the child. This is an interesting thing because it really changes the situation that a lot of poly parents are in, where you have multiple people involved as parents in your child's life. Maybe you haven't gone through the formalities of adoption, but the assumption in the past has always been that the people who are not legally recognized parents have absolutely no recourse should the people who are legally recognized parents decide that they want the child to have nothing more to do with that person. This potentially creates a different situation. And personally, I think that's great because it sucks as a kid to have somebody you consider a parent walk out of your life. But because it's a change, people need to know, at least in Washington, California, and Delaware, that this is a potential thing that they need to account for in their relationships.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That is really, you're all calm and everything, but that's pretty good news.
Yeah, I mean, this is really exciting because in a country that really values independence, one of the things that we don't do well is letting people choose for themselves who family is. And a lot of people fall through the cracks as a result. Polyamorous families more than most. This is one of those things where we're saying, oh, well, if you acted like a parent and you took parental responsibilities, maybe you're a parent. It's one of the times that we're looking at parentage as something that might be a outcome of a relationship instead of an outcome of DNA.
Is there anything else we need to know about this act?
There's a lot of other small details, but those are the two big ones that I'm talking to polyamorous people about, and the two really big benefits, I think, for poly people in states where it might get enacted or is enacted.
That's really cool. Melissa, thank you so much for sharing that with us. If people want to find out more, apart from the URL, which we'll put in the show notes for that particular act, where can they find you?
Well, I tweet as Brimj, like I did back on the same as on the polyweekly forums. That's BRIMJ. And my law firm is called Small Law. That's SMOL-law.com. And my email is melissa@smalllaw.com.
And we'll put all that in the show notes so you don't have to try and spell things just from hearing them, which is always difficult. Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us about this. This is great news.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And I think this is kind of a challenge to the polyamory community because we have something that we can turn our activist muscles towards that will be good for everyone.
That's pretty cool. Thanks again for joining us, Melissa.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
And thanks again to Melissa for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Today's feedback is on episode 560, Poly and Pregnant. This is from Alana, who says, look, I'm poly and pregnant now. Pregnancy does bring up a lot of emotions. It's a time when it's of vital importance that a woman feels supported, loved, and nourished. Having a baby is a big life transition, and things that may have been repressed or ignored come up to the surface. As a mother who's chosen to have home births and is passionate about birth, I can say that insecurities can cause complications during labor. Personally, she says, in our relationship, we chose to take a break from polyamory during the pregnancy. Neither of us had other partners at the time, so it was an easy decision. I was also feeling more fragile and easily triggered than normal and didn't want to put my partner through extra stress. Well, Alana, those are all excellent points. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that, this is what I need. And again, it's always okay in a relationship to ask for what you need. The challenge is, of course, when there are other people involved and those other people have, sort of long-term invested relationships. Maybe somebody you've been dating for a couple of weeks, it's not that bad. Somebody who's a long-term partner, they should probably be brought in on that decision making or see if there's a way that things can be accommodated. Because while it's completely understandable, and I do agree that the focus should be on the mom, that being said, it's really not fair to have a partner of, months or years suddenly broken off because of this. I think it would be really fantastic if we could all find a way to support each other through it. But this is coming from a woman who's never been pregnant, so what do I know?
It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by lovely polyamorists everywhere.
And this week's Happy Poly Moment is from Louise in the UK. She and her nesting partner were polyunsaturated, had some awkward dates, not really working too well. And then she writes, recently, my partner started dating the lady from a poly couple who are friends of ours, and I was incredibly happy for him, although I confess I was a little sad I couldn't find anyone I felt safe enough to be attracted to and was also attracted to me. Then, to my surprise, a month or so back, a kind gentleman who I already knew I felt perfectly safe around, but who I assumed was mono with his wife, told me in conversation that he was in fact poly. Remembering Franklin Vaugh's sage advice, I moved in the direction of greatest courage and asked him out. We have been deep in NRE since then and had some very enjoyable sexy and kinky times together. I met his wife, who is great and incredibly supportive of our relationship. I insisted on buying us all pizza so we could hang out and get to know each other. It's important for me as well to at least know and preferably like and care about my metamors. Happily, I think they're both great and looking forward to getting to know them better. Last weekend, 5 of our polycule, my new partner, myself, my nesting partner, his partner, and her nesting partner, were all at the same event and finally met each other. This was also the first time nesting partner met new partner. I was so worried they might not like each other, but everybody seemed to get along fine. I've gone from being lonely and polyunsaturated to being in the middle of a long squiggly polycule and full of NRE. The only problem is that we all live in different areas across England. Love may be infinite, but British train fares are truly exorbitant. Well, sorry about the train fares, Louise, but apart from that, that's a lovely Happy Poly moment. And that wraps it up for today's show. Polyweekly is a free resource. We've helped hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and continued success with polyamory. Your donations and your letters and Happy Poly moments keep the podcast free for everyone, both inside and outside the community. If you have a Happy Poly moment or a question or feedback, email polyweekly@gmail.com or call 802-505-POLY. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/polyweekly, on Twitter at polyweekly or at cunningminx, and elsewhere on the web as polyweekly. All of our show notes and all of our back episodes that you are free to search through, as well as our training courses and Poly Bookstore, are up at polyweekly.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, it's not all about the sex.